All right, today we're going to be starting Unit 6 called Quadratic Functions and Equations, and we're going to be looking at page 1 and 2 today. So, at the start of page 1, it's talking about standard form. So the standard form of a quadratic equation is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where a and b and c are replaced with numbers. Okay, when you graph a quadratic equation, it creates a U-shaped curve called a parabola. I know it looks like parabola, but we say it parabola. All right, so this says use a graphing calculator to sketch. We don't have graphing calculators, so we're just going to roughly sketch this on our paper. So that graph is going to look somewhat like this. And then the next graph is going to look something like this. So if a, so whatever number is in front of x squared, is positive, then the parabola opens up and looks like a smile or a smiley face. If a is negative and it's opened down, it's going to look like a frowny face. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is axis of symmetry, which is this is something we're going to talk about a lot today. So the axis of symmetry is the vertical line that divides the parabola into two equal parts. So we have a formula for it. X equals negative b over 2a, which we're going to be using that formula a lot today. All right, then the next thing we're going to talk about today is the vertex, and this is the turning point of the parabola. So the lowest point is called the minimum, and the highest point is called the maximum. All right, so let's look at some examples. So number 1, they want us to find the axis of symmetry and vertex and then sketch the parabola. So here's our function, y equals x squared plus 8x plus 15. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find our a, b, and c values. So a sits next to x squared. If there's no visible number beside that, we assume it's the number 1. B sits next to x, so that's 8. And c is the number without a letter by it, and that would be 15. Now that we have our a, b, and c, we're going to find our axis of symmetry. So I'm going to use my formula, x equals negative b over 2a, and I'm going to plug those values in. So I'm going to have negative 8 over 2 times 1, because my b value is 8 and my a value is 1. Now you can type that fraction right there into your calculator, and when you do, you're going to get negative 4. So on my axis of symmetry line, I'm going to put x equals negative 4. It's very important to put the x equals because we're representing a line here. So if you just put negative 4, that just means a point on the graph, and that's not what we're talking about. So even on the test, if you are typing it in, you have to put x equals. All right, now to finish off, we're going to find the vertex. So I'm going to take that negative 4, and I'm going to plug it into my function wherever there is an x. So right here and right here, I'm going to be plugging in a negative 4. So I'm going to have negative 4 in parentheses squared plus 8 times negative 4 plus 15. All right, make sure you're writing it down with all the parentheses like I am. Then you can type that into your calculator, and it will give you a -1. So our vertex is a point, it's x comma y. So our x is our vertex, is our axis of symmetry, and our y is whatever number we just found. So now we're going to sketch it. So I'm going to start with drawing my axis of symmetry. I'm going to label it x equals -4. Now I have to decide if my graph opens up or down. So if I look all the way back to my a value, okay, it was a +1. So since it's positive, my graph is going to open up. And then I'm going to label the vertex -4, -1. All right, let's do some more examples. Number 2. The first thing we have to do is label our A, B, and C. All right, A sits next to x squared. Right now there's a negative sign beside it, so that tells me that's a -1. B is +10, and C is -23. So I have my formula, x equals -b/2a. So I'm going to plug in my b value and my a value. Now, when I type this fraction in my calculator, I will get a +5. So on my axis of symmetry line, I'm going to write x equals 5. All right. Now to find my vertex, I'm going to take that 5 and I'm going to plug it in for my x values. Okay, always put the number in parentheses, no matter if it's positive or negative. Then I'm going to type all of this into my calculator, and I'm going to get 2. So then my vertex is 5, 2. All right, lastly, to sketch it, I'm going to start by drawing my axis of symmetry line. All right, and I'm going to label it x equals 5. Now I have to figure out if it faces up or down. So if I look back at my a value, it was a -1. So since it's negative, my graph is going to face down. Well, all right, and then I'm going to label my vertex 5, 2. All right, number 3. We're going to start out by labeling my A, my B, and my C. So my A sits next to x squared, which is 3. My B sits next to x, which is -12. And my C is a +5. All right, now since my B is negative, okay, right here it's a -12, and then my formula B is negative, I have to make sure I have 2 negative signs there. And then over 2 times 3. So when I type that fraction in my calculator, I should get a +2. So x equals +2. Now I'm going to take that 2 and I'm going to plug it in for my x values in the equation. And when you plug all of that into your calculator, you should get a -7. So my vertex is 2, -7. Now I'm going to sketch it. So I start by drawing my axis of symmetry and labeling it x equals 2. Now to figure out if my graph faces up or down, I look at my a value, which was a positive 3. So it's going to be facing up. And I'm going to label my vertex 2, negative 7. All right, number 4. We start out by labeling our A, B, and C. So my A is a positive 4, my B is a positive 8, and my C is a negative 1. Now I'm going to plug my A and B values into my axis of symmetry formula. So I get negative 8 over 2 times 4. I'm going to type that into my calculator, and I'm going to get a negative 1. So my axis of symmetry is x equals negative 1. Now I'm going to take my equation, and wherever there is a letter x, I'm going to replace it with a negative 1. So when I type that into my calculator, I should get negative 5. So my vertex is negative 1, negative 5. So I'm going to draw my axis of symmetry. I'm going to label it x equals negative 1. Our A value is a positive 4. So my graph is going to be facing up. And then I'm going to label my vertex negative 1, negative 5. All right, I want you to pause the video here and do 5 and 6 by yourself, and then come back and check your work. All right, and there's your answers to 5 and 6. Make sure you check your work. All right, we're going to do 7, 8, and 9 together because if you look at them, they're all missing either A, B, or C. So looking at number 7, we have y equals negative x squared plus 4x. So we're missing our term C because we don't have a number without a letter beside it. So I just need to find my A and B values. So my A value is negative 1 and my B value is 4. So when I plug that into my formula, I have negative parentheses negative 1 over, When I plug that into my formula, I have negative 4 over 2 times negative 1. When I plug that into my calculator, I get a positive 2. So now to find my vertex, I'm going to take my equation and plug in a 2 wherever there is an x. And when I do that and I plug that into my calculator, I get a positive 4. So I'm going to draw my sketch. All right, if I look back at my A value, it's a negative 1, so that means my graph is going to be face down. And I'm going to label my vertex 2, 4. All right, number 8. This time we have our A, we don't have a B, and we have a C. So my A is 1, my C is negative 3, and since we don't have a B value, I'm going to put a 0 in for B. So when I plug it into my axis of symmetry formula, I'm going to have negative 0 over 2 times 1, which when I type that in my calculator, I get 0. So when now I'm going to plug the 0 into our equation. And that's going to equal negative 3. So now I'm going to draw my sketch. I'm going to label my axis of symmetry x equals 0. Our A value is positive, so it's going to be facing up. And then I'm going to label my vertex 0, 3. All right, number 9, y equals negative 2x squared plus 8. So my A is negative 2. My B is 0 again because we don't have a term with just x. And then my C is 8. So that means I have negative 0 over 2 times negative 2. When I type that into my calculator, I get 0. Now I'm going to take my equation, and wherever there is an x, I'm going to plug a 0 in for that. So when I type that into my calculator, I get 8. So for my sketch, I'm going to have my axis of symmetry labeled as x equals 0. My A value is negative, so it's going to be face down. And I'm going to label my vertex 0, 8. And that concludes the notes for axis of symmetry and the vertex.